So before we start the high-level segment, I would like to welcome some leading non-state actor voices on stage to showcase the actions already underway in the real economy to accelerate climate action and build the needed resilience. Therefore, I would like now to welcome Elizabeth Ndadala, immediate past president and board member of the Pan-Africa Farmers Organization and president of Eastern Africa Farmers Federation, also member of the advisory committee of the United Nations Food Systems Summit. Also Victoria Tauli-Corpus, executive director of Tepteba and former United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And Mr. Paul Polman, fellow chair and founder of Imagine. Please join me to stage to the theme of nature's place in the race to zero emissions.
Thank you, Gonzalo Munoz, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I stand here as a proud farmer. I have passion for my land. I love my work and the communities it supports. I'm happy that my work gives you life every day. But I'm not just one farmer. As already introduced, I'm the president of Eastern Africa Farmers Federation and the board member representing women at the Pan-Africa Farmers Organization. So I carry the message of over 80 million smallholder farmers. We feed over 800 million people. We give you the food to live well, but often we can't live well ourselves. Our livelihoods are at the mercy of next season's yield. Our livelihoods are at the mercy of climate change. Too many of us go hungry every day. The suicide rate in farming is higher than any other sector, and it's rising every day. The global food system is heading towards collapse, if it's not yet collapsed. Agriculture occupies 40% of Earth's land surface. 25% of the land is degraded. Our soil is dying. It drives 25% of global emissions and 80% of the biodiversity crisis, affecting 3.2 billion people. And these are people who live in rural communities, and especially the smallholder farmers in developing countries. 3 billion people cannot afford to eat a healthy diet. The current market forces and subsidies trap farmers in business models that harm our land, our planet, our health, and our future. We must reverse this destruction before it's too late. And we can, by listening to farmers. We understand how to farm in a way that respects nature and that nurtures land as a carbon sink. We've been doing it for years, but we need your help to do this at scale. We need a seat at the table. It is farmers that can build food systems that our children and grandchildren will thank us for. And Region 10 will provide us with that seat. This is why I'm grateful for this opportunity to address you today, because the world's farmers stand ready to act. In Region 10, we are stepping up to scale a regenerative global food system in a decade, and we need you to reciprocate. Together, we can ensure that by 2030, that over half of the world's food is produced in a way that delivers good food for our people, for nature, and for our planet. But we can only do this if we fairly reward farmers for doing what we do best and doing what we love, stewarding the land, so that we all benefit. My message to you is simple. We stand ready to play our part in fighting climate change, in reversing nature laws, and providing affordable health and good food for all. but we need you to act with us. And there is no time to waste. The time is now. I would now like to welcome to stage Victoria Tawili Kopuz, Executive Director of Tebteba and former United Nations Special Rapporteur on the rights of indigenous people, to reinforce my voice. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth Madala, for your introduction. I am here to speak for the interests of 500 million indigenous peoples in over 90 countries, the unsung heroes that protect 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity. Where we still have forests and wetlands, it is because we protect this even when we are at the risk of being killed or criminalized. These places not only keep carbon on the ground, they help us remove it from the atmosphere. Protecting the rights of indigenous peoples is fundamental to our ability to mitigate and adapt to climate change and reverse nature laws. Industrial agriculture is encroaching into many of our territories, driving us from our lands, destroying our ways of life, and devastating forests and destroying the planet's biodiversity. 5 million hectares of forests are destroyed to grow commodities every single year, and 40 times more financial incentives are available for deforestation than to keep forests standing. It doesn't have to be this way. There is so much we can learn from indigenous peoples. Today's so-called superfoods such as quinoa, sweet potatoes, among others, are all indigenous varieties. We know how to grow food in ways that preserves the planet's natural capital. We've been doing it for millennia with practices such as terra preta in Brazil or Mexican chinampa systems that capture carbon, prevent flooding, and produce varied food all year round. We call it things like sumak kausay, good life in Quechua. Now you call it regeneration. They mean the same thing, working with nature, not against it. Though through Region 10, we can drive an agricultural transformation that respects the rights of indigenous peoples everywhere, a transformation that is inclusive, that leaves no one behind. My message is simple. Indigenous peoples stand ready to act. Our cultures, our ancestral knowledge and practices can play a vital role in building food systems that will protect and regenerate the natural world. We need you to act with us. I would now like to welcome Paul Polman, the co-chair of FOLU and founder of Imagine, to the stage.
Well, thank you, Victoria.
Now, not in the next decade. And in the words of Michael Jackson,
Well, thank you, Victoria. You've heard from farmers. You've heard from indigenous people. Desperate calls to some extent, and rightfully so. If you landed from Mars and saw the way that we produce food, you would not think that we have the right to call ourselves the most intelligent species. The way we produce food is ruining the planet, degrading the land, depleting scarce resources like water, becoming the biggest driver of climate change, undermining our health, and as you just heard, ruining livelihoods. We actually seem to like it. as we're subsidizing this destruction to the tune of $1 trillion a year. This is lunacy playing out at species level. Our food system is at the heart of achieving the SDGs. It simply isn't possible to keep 1.5 degrees alive if we don't halt and reverse nature loss, or we cannot deliver the global goals unless we act now to radically transform our food and land use systems. A regenerative food system holds the key to all of these 3 goals. It's the best, fastest, and cheapest solution we have to fight climate change and inequity. Well, the moral argument is clear, but so should be the economics. The difference between the cost of inaction and the cost of action to transform our food system could be as much as $25 trillion a year by 2050. And farmers already have the solution. Many of them have been doing this for years through regenerative and agroecological practices, driving better yield with lower inputs, building carbon-rich soils, more resilient crops, and yes, getting better income as a result as well. It works. Yet, less than 5% of our food system is produced this way. Scaling this to 50% by 2030 can be done for just $60 billion a year, less than 2% of the total investment required for the transition to net zero. And the benefits will be huge. When combined with strong action on deforestation and diets, it can cut up to 25% of global emissions, sequestering up to 7 gigatons per year of CO2, restoring degraded land, ensuring food security, and yes, halting and reversing nature loss by 2030. And we have a solution. It is called Regen 10, a bold collective action plan to scale the regenerative food systems worldwide in a decade. Our goal, very simple. By 2030, over half of the world's food to be produced in a way that delivers positive outcomes for people, nature, and climate. And what makes it so powerful is that it puts farmers at the center of this transition and brings together the stakeholders from across the system to empower and enable them. The alliance includes the farmer organizations, representing over 1 billion farmers worldwide, business organizations, representing 50% of global food production, and covering over 30% of the sector's emission. Together, we will drive the alignment and convergence of existing initiatives and deliver on the 3 critical areas: mobilizing and enabling the global farmer community, aligning on metrics, outcomes, definitions, and data, and developing transition pathways and proof points. The goals are simple. By 2030, have 50% of the world's food produced regeneratively for just $60 billion a year. 500 million farmers paid fairly for farming regeneratively. And yes, 60 billion per year deployed to finance this transition. In the next 6 months, we will align a first wave of interventions to be delivered before the next COP in Africa. But to do this, we also need your help. First, build food and farming into all country NDCs. Second, put in place the policies and subsidy reforms that reward farmers fairly for good land stewardship. And finally, create the market incentives, innovation, and financing to help transform our value chains. As world leaders, you have a critical role to play. We all do, not just as politicians, business leaders, farmers, indigenous people, but above all, as human beings. Thank you very much.
Distinguished Head of State and Government, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I now open the joint fifth meeting of the COP26, the fifth meeting of the CMA 16, and the fifth meeting of the CMA 3rd. As we continue the national statement, I would like to remind representatives of the actions in place to ensure effective time management, namely the 3-minute time limit for statement during this high-level segment. Please be reminded that statements should be as concise, as brief as possible, as full text of the official statement will be made on the UNFCCC website. Speaking slot for those who are not in the plenary at the time for delivery of the statement will be scheduled to speak at the end of all statements of the same category. Allow me to also remind you of the COVID-19 protocols to ensure the health and safety of all participants. In accordance with the UNFCCC COP26 COVID-19 Code of Conduct, participants must wear face covering except when eating, drinking, sitting in office, meetings, sitting to perform negotiation, or are medically exempt. United Nations guidance and practice recommend face covering to be a surgical or FFP2. Delegates should wear face mask while seated where social distancing is not possible. As part of the hygiene measures to ensure a safe environment of all participants, statement will be delivered from alternate restrooms. Dear distinguished Head of State and Government, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, let us begin. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency, Mrs. Maya Amor Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It is my honor to present the national statement of Barbados at this COP26. Barbados sees its obligation to address climate crisis as securing the future for our citizens and also to secure our safety from the development of a severe crisis, while at the same time we will work with others globally to ensure that we can mitigate all of the worst effects of the climate crisis facing our country and our citizens. In fulfillment of our obligations, my country has submitted to UNFCCC one of the most ambitious and action-oriented 2021 NDC updates. We hope and believe we can secure the target of pathway of 1.5 degrees within the promise of the Paris Agreement. Domestically, we will become and hope to reduce all emissions economy-wide by 70% by 2030 and as close to zero by 2035. Barbados' NDC sets an economy-wide mitigation contribution, which is mirrored in our Roofs to Reefs program, which we see as our major adaptation program. It is a multi-sectoral program across water, waste, agriculture, energy, housing, and transport. And we see it as part of a strategic transformation to adapt in the event that the world does not meet 1.5 degrees. It can be used as well as a development model for all developing countries, and we are prepared to work with all persons to improve it and to perfect it, because we do not believe that we are omniscient in these matters. Barbados is also meeting its obligation to its citizens and to the citizens of the world, and indeed to the planet on which we live. We call on all countries to act on their moral obligation, and by their actions to stop condemning those of us who live between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn to the dystopian reality of the climate crisis. Disaster, refugee status, poverty, truncated development, compromised livelihoods, and most of all, regrettably, jeopardized lives. We have completed just recently the hosting of UNCTAD 15, two key documents were settled: the Bridgetown Covenant and the political declaration, The Spirit of Speightstown. In them, much of our aspirations are captured. We now call on the wider international community, particularly those whose high emissions are the cause of the climate crisis, to do the following. One, to help us and them move, as we know, to green economies, to allow preferential access to grants and loans for small island developing states and those other countries on the front line of the climate crisis on the basis of their vulnerability and not on the basis of GDP per capita. We ask equally that there is an increased level of capital for adaptation and that we adhere to a 50-50 split with mitigation, which is absolutely urgent because those small island developing states need it to augment water resources, to convert our electricity and our transport sector, and to promote food and nutritional security if we are literally to survive the increase in temperature. We ask also that the world consider the adoption of a multidimensional vulnerability index that is reflective of the risk and vulnerability caused by the climate-induced whiteout risk and events that we face. We've been calling for this for over 3 decades and are yet to see it. But at the very least, if we don't get the index, we ask for criteria to include vulnerability. We also ask that there be a voluntary allocation of special drawing rights of the world's strongest economies in order to move forward to create a resilience and sustainability trust. My friends, the action is required now, not in the next decade. And in the words of Michael Jackson, it is up to us to heal the world and to make the world a better place. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Alexander De Croo, Prime Minister of Belgium. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, climate change has arrived, and it has arrived with a vengeance. Firestorms that rage through our forests, heat waves that kill our crops and vaporize our drinking water supplies, the floods in our villages, the 41 people who died in such floods in my country last July, the first Belgian citizens who fell victim to climate change. Other countries and other continents already paid a much higher price. But for us, that was something far away, something on TV. Not anymore. Climate change is hitting home also in Europe. The report by the International Panel on Climate Change makes for a very sobering read indeed. The increase in carbon dioxide concentration and the increase in global temperature are unprecedented. The report leaves us with one conclusion only. We need a rapid and large-scale reduction of CO2 emissions to bring the 1.5 degrees goal within reach. There is no time to lose. We are behind schedule and we need to pick up the pace. So we need to do more, and it needs to happen here in Glasgow. We simply cannot afford not to act. We simply cannot lean back and wait for the next flood, the next heat wave, the next forest fire to kill and destroy. That is why Belgium and the European Union are undertaking action. What is Belgium doing? We are investing to remain one of the world's leading producers of offshore wind energy. We will triple our offshore capacity by the end of the decade. That will cover the electricity needs of every single household in my country. We will build an energy island to connect our offshore sites, a giant socket linking renewable energy production around the North Sea. We have the clear ambition to become one of the most important hubs in clean hydrogen supply. To strengthen the resilience of the most fragile countries, we are increasing our contribution to international climate finance with 60%. And we will contribute with €200 million to the fight against deforestation. With the Green Deal, the European Union intends to be climate neutral by 2050 and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030. Europe has a historic responsibility regarding climate change. That is why we take the lead. But we are not the only ones to shoulder that responsibility. The other major economies should urgently take equivalent action, join Europe's ambitions. They should not do so for their own benefits, because sustainability is not only a matter of saving lives, it is also about protecting livelihoods, about building a new economy, creating new jobs, reconnecting with green economic growth, leveraging the innovative strengths of our companies for a more sustainable future. Otherwise, we will not get back on track to what we agreed in Paris. Now, the world is full of talent to make that happen. There are plenty of bright minds who are working on the climate solutions as we speak, in our world-class universities, in our forward-looking companies. Young people working from the garage of their parents will come up with climate solutions we're not even aware of today. We need to help people and companies to make this transition. And we need to ensure that this new economy is inclusive as well, making sure that everyone is on board. The climate transition is not only something for rich people in rich countries, because then we will fail. So everyone needs to be part of the change. That sustainable technologies are affordable, that the energy bill goes down thanks to renewables, that women and men have the right skills for new green jobs. We can do this. Europe can do this. The world can do this. We either overcome the climate crisis together or we do not overcome it at all. Ladies and gentlemen, there has been plenty of time for long speeches and lofty ambitions. Now it is time for action, starting today. This is not just another perfunctory summit we routinely attend. We are here out of sheer necessity and urgency. It's all hands on deck now to do the job for which we were elected or appointed, to keep our people safe from harm, the very first task of any government, whatever its constitutional or political setup, to make our societies prosper, to make our economies reconnect with growth that is sustainable. We can still reach the Paris objectives. We have the scientific analysis. We have the technological solutions at hand. We are raising the money we need. We have the talent that is coming up with innovative answers as we speak. This is a challenge where young women and men lead the way. Now, we need to muster political will. That's why we are here. The Glasgow conference is about political will. It is about the long-term perspective which requires action now. About making climate transition happen while no one is left behind, so that we come out stronger, more resilient. The world has come together here in Glasgow. Let us find that willpower and start to turn the tide. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Philippe Pierre, Prime Minister of St. Lucia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, I join in commending you for hosting this momentous convergence of world leaders to set the stage for the United Nations Climate Change Conference this year. As we grapple with the global pandemic, I believe our presence here is testimony to our recognition that we are at a critical juncture, a tipping point. This is the last decade, 2020 to 2040, the last chance to set the world on track to 1.5 degrees. The question is, will we rise to the challenge? Will our moral conscience prevail? Small island developing states, as my country, St. Lucia, whose special circumstances and needs were settled in Paris, are in the midst of a crisis for humanity. The UN Secretary General described the IPCC Working Group 1 report as a code red for humanity. Undeniably, certain changes such as sea level rise and ocean acidification are already locked in with dire consequences for SIDS and low-lying states. But we know that 1.5 degrees Celsius is still within our reach. To achieve it, we must act, and act now. Countries must urgently bring forward the NDCs with 2030 targets consistent with 1.5 degree temperature goal, supported by credible net zero by 2050 long-term strategies. We must support wind, solar, and other renewable energy investments. The power to turn things around lies in our collective hands. We must be focused and resolute. We cannot waver on matters of human survival. In this regard, world leaders must deliver on the long-term climate finance goal that was promised, supporting not only mitigation, but also adaptation. We must also raise the profile of and mainstream loss and damage as a distinct pillar of climate action and support. It is high time that we complete the Paris Rulebook. When we bring to fruition that vital work, we can strengthen accountability and enable the highest possible ambition while ensuring transparency and environmental integrity. Colleagues, friends, we in the developing world are on the front lines, exposed. Our poor, vulnerable citizens have limited ability to respond to climate change effects, and so their quality of life is significantly diminished. As responsible leaders, can we in good conscience sacrifice humanity for industry? Will we continue to ignore the science, to gamble with the future of our youth, women, private sector and NGOs? What are the prospects for countries like Taiwan, yet to be recognized, but also confronting climate change while supporting SIDS? The young people who will inherit this planet are watching. We cannot fail them. Let us not be that generation of leaders who had the last chance to set the world on track, but choose not to put people first. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Royal Highness, Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa, Crown Prince and Prime Minister of Bahrain. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. For millennia, technological and economic development moved at a steady pace. That is, until the advent of the Industrial Revolution, which set in motion profound changes for mankind, ushering in an era of change made on a previously unimaginable scale. The vast majority of humans alive in the 19th century experienced extreme poverty. Today, the figure stands at less than 10%. 200 years ago, half of children born died before the age of 5. Now less than 4% suffer this fate. Our progress also led to the rise of a global order characterized by economic interdependence, which in turn brought stability to many regions of the world. Sadly, these feats, however impressive, came at a price for our planet, and our collective duty is to ensure that they do not cost us the Earth. In doing so, we must harness our productive potential with the same drive that greeted the dawn of the industrial age, marshalling the might and innovation and human ingenuity to propel a greener and more prosperous world. Emissions reductions through investment in renewable energy is certainly a central feature of this approach. But even as we increase renewable energy's share of global demand, carbon will remain a fixture of the global energy mix for many years to come. This means that billions of tons of carbon will need to be removed and sequestered each year if we are to arrive at net zero and limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. While the Kingdom of Bahrain is responsible for just 0.07% of global emissions, We recognize, not least as an island nation, that climate change is a global challenge that requires global solutions. Developing the kinds of technologies necessary to meaningfully address the climate crisis requires us to both act in concert, but also to lead by example. Today, I am pleased to announce that Bahrain is committed to reaching net zero by 2060 and has set a range of ambitious interim goals to ensure that we proceed without delay. By 2035, we will reduce emissions by 30% through decarbonization and efficiency initiatives and double our deployment of renewables from the targets we set at COP21. Our 2035 targets also include carbon removal solutions by quadrupling mangrove coverage, doubling tree coverage in Bahrain, and directly investing in carbon capture technologies, which we believe is essential. Forums like COP26 and the recently concluding Middle East Green Initiative serve as vital reminders of our shared interests and common future. We must take advantage of these opportunities to deliver upon the promises we make and have made, identifying multilateral solutions that vitally are accessible to all. A future net zero economy capable of propelling humanity to new heights depends entirely on the ability of people to participate in it, both as producers and as consumers. We must therefore ensure that our work to curb emissions moves in lockstep with our work to improve livelihoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Najib Makati, Prime Minister of Lebanon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, honorable leaders. It is with great urgency that I am addressing you today, as the world is experiencing increased impacts from climate change. The track at which climate action is moving is simply unbalanced to the climate impacts to come, which is why it is crucial to act on all fronts as per Article 3 of the Convention and Article 2 of the Paris Agreement, while ensuring the delivery of the necessary means of implementation and support for developing countries to effectively participate in the race against climate change. I am also addressing you today as Lebanon is facing many challenges, including social, economic, banking, financial, and monetary crisis, coupled with the COVID-19 pandemic, the August 4 port explosion, and the impact of Syrian refugees. Adverse climate impacts will add an additional layer of challenges and set back any improvement in Lebanese socio-economic status. Temperatures will increase, leading to long periods of drought and substantial reduction of snow cover. Sea levels will gradually rise, expected to cause massive damage to coastal infrastructure and associated economic losses. National studies estimate losses of approximately $1.4 billion by 2040 associated with the rising sea levels. Another report by UNDP points out that the total cost of climate change on the Lebanese economy is estimated to be $16 billion by 2040. Distinguished participants and colleagues, Lebanon has responded to the global call for ambition and believes in fighting the climate crisis through adopting a pathway toward sustainable development. Lebanon crisis have put us in a position of choice pertaining to the way we will recover. The key concepts which should be at the core of this recovery are sustainability and resilience. And it just so happens that these concepts are embedded in climate action and consequently Lebanon's updated nationally determined contribution. Lebanon has enhanced the ambition of its NDC by increasing its unconditional renewable energy target by 15 to 18% by year 2030, which will lead to at least an additional 25% emission reduction compared to Lebanon's 2015 NDC. Lebanon's update NDC is an important milestone for ambitious climate action in the country, with clear implications for the implementation of Agenda 2030 for sustainable development, particularly in relation to green economic growth, affordable and clean energy, food security, improved air quality, and gender equality. In this sense, these climate pledges, priorities, and organizers constitute a critical roadmap for implementation and support. We are increasing our readiness to absorb that support, to accelerate the NDC implementation, as well as mainstream the concept of green economy. We call on all international partners to positively engage with its dedicated facility to secure a greener transition in Lebanon. Lebanon will also submit a 2050 long-term strategy for low emission and resilient development strategies, which prioritize as a green and circular economy, a decoupling of economic growth and greenhouse gas emissions. This strategy also aims to explore how Lebanon can achieve a net zero emissions economy. Lebanon is at the forefront of countries seeking to achieve human and environmental sustainability and a supportive partner for regional and international efforts to combat climate change. Our national vision believes that the future of humanity lies in green solutions, wise management of environmental assets, and the importance of coordination between national, regional, and international green initiatives. Lebanon's beautiful nature is our most important asset, and we will act to protect and preserve our green Lebanon. Therefore, Lebanon highly appreciates the effort of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the set of initiatives it has put forward to protect the environment and tackle the climate change challenges. Its keenness to launch the Green Middle East Initiative, which will benefit all the Middle East region. Lebanon is ready to cooperate and positively engage for such initiatives and stand ready to play a regional role, potentially becoming a hub in sharing its experience among the regional partners. We are encouraged to see that we are not alone in tackling the climate change challenges. Inclusive and sustainable green recovery will put the world on a path to reach climate neutrality by 2050, and with it a wealth of solutions to poverty, inequality, and pollution. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Sauli Niinisto, President of Finland. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, more than 40 years ago, in 1979, experts from around the world met in Geneva at the first World Climate Conference. In that conference, climate change was recognized as a serious threat. In 1990, the IPCC published its first assessment report that highlighted the global consequences of climate change. For decades, science has been sounding the alarm bell. During these decades, we have gained more knowledge. We know the risks. A lot has been done. The Paris Agreement was a historic milestone, and after that, many countries have set new climate goals. Finland belongs to the most ambitious one. We aim to be carbon neutral by 2035. But we have reached a point where we need to move beyond goals and pledges. Change may seem inconceivable, but only until we act. Combating climate change is one of our weightiest human responsibilities. Ensuring adequate climate finance is crucial. Finland is doing its part by almost doubling its climate finance to developing countries. By co-chairing the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action, we also encourage the integration of climate action into national budgeting. Many truly impactful measures lie in this domain. As an Arctic country, Finland is particularly concerned about the fast-warming Arctic region. Everyone else should be concerned too. If we lose the Arctic, we lose the globe. In the Arctic, reducing black carbon and methane emissions is essential. No emission reduction measures will be enough if we don't take care of our carbon sinks. As the most forested country in Europe, Finland places great importance to sustainable use of forests. Every year, 150 million trees are planted in Finland. Globally, we need to strengthen efforts to halt forest loss. Ladies and gentlemen, the original title of the 1979 World Climate Conference was a conference of experts on climate and mankind. Already more than 40 years ago, we knew that climate change is the result of the actions of mankind, and that it can determine the future of mankind. Now it is the time to deliver on our pledges and shoulder our human responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Cleopas Dlamini, Prime Minister of Eswatini. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, heads of state and government, distinguished delegates, it is with great honor that I present this statement to this august gathering on behalf of His Majesty King Mswati III and Ingwenyama and the Eswatini nation. Allow me, Mr. President, to congratulate the government of the United Kingdom for the excellent task of ensuring that we gather physically and in a safe manner here in this beautiful city of Glasgow. Eswatini believes that you and the Secretariat brave such odds to present the sense of urgency on the need to accelerate our commitment to the Paris Agreement. The latest IPCC report shows that 1.5 degrees Celsius global warming is likely to occur, and Eswatini and the entire Southern African region is warming at twice the global rate. We are already experiencing extreme weather events, which include heat waves, floods, and droughts, resulting in huge economic losses. We are still reeling from the effects of El Nino drought scourge, as well as the recent cyclone Ilos, worsening the level of vulnerability for the people of Eswatini. Our recovery is already compromised in light of the prevalence of COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. President, warnings are clear that such occurrences are yet to increase in frequency and in intensity. This should be, to all of us, a clear call for raising ambition and fast-tracking climate action. Developing countries, including African nations, are ready to transform their economies to be low carbon and climate resilience. However, without the much needed adequate, predictable, and accessible financial support, this remains an impossible task. We therefore emphasize the importance of the delivery of support for developing countries, especially through the fulfillment of the developed country commitment of jointly mobilizing $100 billion per year by 2020. The urgency of agreeing on a post-2025 finance regime that is in line with adaptation gap report cannot be overemphasized. Mr. President, Eswatini fully supports the effective implementation of the Paris Agreement, despite contributing as little as 0.007% of the global emissions. We have submitted an enhanced and ambitious NDC focusing on all sectors. We look forward to a global pathway towards the net zero emission in order to keep within the targeted 1.5 degrees Celsius objective. In so doing, we plead that we keep to all the universal values, in particular the UN Sustainable Development Agenda 2030 principle of leaving no one behind, and include the Republic of China, Taiwan in these matters. We pledge our support to you, and my delegation is committed to participating in all deliberations to ensure a successful outcome of this conference, including the completion of the rules governing the implementation of the Paris Agreement. I thank you, Mr. President. May God Almighty bless us all.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Michael Martin, Prime Minister of Ireland. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
President, Excellencies, this is an important meeting for all of the world's people. We come here as leaders, and it is vital that we offer the leadership the world now urgently needs. Climate change is real. We are seeing its serious impacts already. The IPCC report in August confirmed to us that it is widespread, it is rapid, and it is intensifying. The scale of this change is unprecedented. But as the report made clear, it is not too late. Human actions still have the potential to determine the future course of climate, the very future of our planet. To achieve our Paris goals, immediate, large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions are essential. Unless we act now, we will not keep the possibility of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees alive. The scientists are playing their part in helping us to understand the dynamics of climate change and in developing the technologies and responses we need to limit its effect. As political leaders, it is our responsibility to put the necessary policies in place. Ireland is ready to play its part. We have enacted legislation to put a legally binding target of reducing our emissions by 2030 to 51% below 2018 levels. We will reach climate neutrality by 2050. We are working closely with our European Union partners in the green transition that will make Europe the first climate-neutral continent. We're implementing a statutory system of carbon budgeting and emissions ceilings for each sector of our economy. We are working at the United Nations Security Council to put the destabilizing impacts of climate change firmly on the agenda. We do not believe or accept, as some would have it, that it is too late, that the transition will be too costly, that it is inevitable that we will leave people behind, that someone else should shoulder the load.
We believe in the immense capacity of humans to work together and to achieve great things. If we act decisively now, we will offer humanity the most valuable prize of all, a livable planet. We can achieve a cooler world, a biodiverse world, a world with healthier air for us to breathe, healthier soil for things to grow in, a world in which people can live more sustainable lives, handing a healing and enriched planet to future generations. We can create a world in which human impact on all parts of our ecosphere, the land, the sea, the air, is brought back into balance. Those of us in the developed world, those who have frankly contributed most to the problems that confront us, all have an obligation to support those who are most acutely challenged by their consequences. Ireland accepts that obligation, and in support of achieving the 100 billion target, I'm therefore pleased to announce today that Ireland will more than double its contribution to developing countries so that we are delivering at least 225 million a year by 2025. As leaders, if we are to bring people with us on this journey of a lifetime, we must also recognise and respect the real anxiety that many people feel when confronted by such an enormous challenge. Our young people worry that there will be no worthwhile future for them to inherit. Workers worry that their jobs will disappear, leaving them without a livelihood. Consumers already feeling the impact of energy price rises feel that the transition would be too costly for them to bear. In response, I say I will do everything in my power, working with all of the leaders here today to make sure that that is not so, to ensure that we will succeed in limiting emissions, to ensure that the transition we deliver is jobs-rich and economically sustainable, to ensure that there is real climate justice and nobody in any part of the world is left behind. The IPCC report makes it clear that every tonne of carbon warms the world. Every second of delay makes our task that bit bigger. Let us leave Glasgow with a renewed commitment to doing what we know needs to be done. Let us move forward together now. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Andrei Plankovic, Prime Minister of Croatia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellencies, Mr. President, climate challenge is the greatest challenge of our lifetime and this century. Even with the most decisive action now, it will still irrevocably worsen lives of generations to come. Resolute and urgent action now can, however, significantly reduce this decline. As leaders, not only as concerned individuals, it is upon us to enact and implement policies, choices to do so. At a minimum, we must achieve the goals of the climate agreements we have already concluded and act more vigorously in their fulfillment. This is key to narrow the ever-increasing gap in areas where we are already off track. We must also be more ambitious. This is a necessity, achievable only if we act together. Joint action is possible only with the engagement of businesses and industries, valuable contribution of the civil society, and the overall support of our citizens. Their proper understanding of effects of climate change through raising awareness and education is crucial for winning this battle. Ladies and gentlemen, Croatia takes nature protection seriously. We have the 4th lowest carbon footprint per capita in the European Union. Croatia's forestry has centuries-long tradition of sustainable management. With 93% of certified forests, our CO2 absorption rate per capita is twice the EU average. Our Plitvice Lakes National Park are in the top 5 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, ranked by the size of the net carbon sink. Altogether, 38% of our land is under protection, with 2 strict reserves, 8 national parks, and 12 nature parks. We are a country blessed with immense biodiversity. To show our continued dedication, I wish to lay out a few of our commitments. Croatia will participate with, for us, highly aspiring 45% in the EU's ambitious goal of 55% reduction in CO2 emissions by 2030. Our coal phase-out year is 2033, but we will push to do it even earlier. With its 2030 target for renewables amounting to just above 39% in final consumption, Croatia surpasses Europe's goal of 32%. We aim to have more than 65% of renewables and 100% low carbon in final production. Croatia sees clean mobility and innovative technologies as an opportunity. All the more so that one of the world's leading companies for the development of e-mobility and self-driving vehicles, Rimac Automobili, comes from Croatia. As a country of 1,000 islands, Croatia intends to contribute to the global goal of ocean protection by having 30% of sea within national jurisdiction under protection. As a highly popular tourist destination, Croatia intends to compensate the impact of tourists on CO2 emissions by planting more than 1 million additional trees annually by 2030. We are enhancing resilience and increasing our aerial firefighting capabilities by establishing a regional center in Zadar, Dalmatia. Its active capabilities will be to benefit of the Mediterranean climatological hotspot, in the vein of what we provided this summer to fight fires in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Greece and Turkey. Ladies and gentlemen, we must all bear our share of responsibility. Fighting climate change requires challenging adaptation and enormous efforts by economies and societies worldwide. The cost of not doing so will be immeasurably greater. We can act willingly or end up being forced to act. Any delay will make the process infinitely more painful. Let us work together to attain our common objectives through the United Nations framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Highness Sheikh Sabha Khaled Al-Hamad Al-Sabah, Prime Minister of Kuwait. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Excellency Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Mr. Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, Your Majesties, Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, may the peace of God be upon you. At the outset, I would like to convey to you the salutations and greetings of His Highness Sheikh Nawaf Al-Ahmad Al-Jaber Al-Sabah, the Emir of the State of Kuwait. May God protect him. I convey to you his wishes of full success in the COP26. Your Majesties, Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, the climate change phenomenon is one of the most serious challenges facing the international community in this era. Addressing climate change is a priority for all world countries. Based on our collective responsibilities, the negative impact of this phenomenon constitutes a threat not only to the environment but also other economic, environmental and social aspects of life. This prompts us all to step up our efforts to address this phenomenon, contain its impact, and to work together in order to achieve the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the goals of the UNFCCC, the Framework Convention, as well as the implementation of the Paris Agreement, The state of Kuwait is committed to the provisions of the Paris Agreement. Therefore, we have updated our NDC documents on the 12th of October 2021. The state of Kuwait contributes through a package of development projects premised on a vision that would avoid the increase, to limit the increase of greenhouse gases by 7.5% until 2035. We have also adopted sustainable development goals and plans at the national level in order to shift towards a low carbon equivalent economic model. Based on the projections of our future emissions from traditional business activities for 2015-2035. The state of Kuwait also attaches great importance to the diversification of all sources of energy production through the introduction of renewable energies and replacing fossil fuels with liquefied natural gas in order to ensure sustainable supply of energy for future generations. We have made great strides in a voluntary and informed manner and in accordance with our capacity in order to rehabilitate our oil and industrial facilities and to shift towards clean refineries for the production of clean energy or fuel. The state of Kuwait endeavors to adopt a low-carbon national strategy for 2050. Premised on the principles of circular carbon economy, we endeavor to promote minimization, disposal, reuse, and recycling of greenhouse gases. We also enact legislation and laws to limit emissions and to adapt to their negative impact at the national level in line with our national, regional, and international environmental commitments. The state of Kuwait has attached great importance to the increase of natural reserves to reach more than 15% of the total area of the state of Kuwait. We also plant the mangrove trees in the northern islands and shores of Kuwait in order to recapture and store carbon. The state of Kuwait has actively participated in the program of the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism, under the Kyoto Protocol. We look forward to participating in the mechanism of Article 6 under Paris Agreement in connection with market and non-market mechanisms and joint cooperation to promote sustainable development and environmental integrity. We hope that the guidelines will be adopted by this conference with the understanding that methodologies and guidelines will be in line with the needs of developing countries and would contribute to the implementation of their future NDCs in line with their SDGs. The state of Kuwait has great international and regional contributions to preserve the environment and natural resources across the world. The Kuwait Development Fund has contributed to the mitigation of the impact of the Aral Sea in Central Asia and also in a region in the Republic of Ghana. We have also contributed to the containing the impact of the Chernobyl explosion. Lately, the Kuwait Development Fund contributed to implement a project in order to limit the impact of sandstorms. This project was carried out between the state of Kuwait and Iraq in order to provide to ensure the reduction by 40% of the impact. I thank you, Mr. President, and may the peace and blessings of God be upon you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Kosi Anatano, Prime Minister of Tuvalu. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. We are gathered here at the beginning of COP26, a COP marked by clear evidence of the increasing dire impacts of climate change and a pandemic that has demonstrated the interconnected nature of our global community. What we do at home reverberates around the world, reminding us of our shared responsibility to address climate change. Tuvalu wishes to reaffirm the urgency of the climate change crisis facing Pacific Seas, despite our negligible contribution to global emissions. We urge world leaders to similarly affirm the critical urgency of the climate crisis. This is the single greatest threat to Pacific livelihoods. Mr. President, we must conclude negotiation on the Paris Rulebook and safeguard the integrity of the Paris Agreement. We must urgently call on major emitters to take stronger climate action. However, we must also realize that these steps may not help countries like Tuvalu that are irreversibly affected by climate change. For Tuvalu, we must fast-track large-scale climate finance that are easy to access for bold, long-term, and permanent adaptation solutions. Mr. President, whatever our progress in combating climate change, there will likely be countries who cannot adapt, and we will see significant loss and damage, even at safer temperature levels. Given this, we must immediately develop new financing mechanisms and funding windows for loss and damage. We must preserve our statehood and sovereignty and develop legal mechanisms to recognize our maritime boundaries as permanent despite the impact of sea level rise. In the midst of COP26, we signed an agreement with the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda to establish a commission of small island states on climate change and international law. The commission is obliged to request advisory opinions from the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea on the legal responsibility of states for carbon emissions, marine pollution, and rising sea levels. We must support initiatives of this nature to develop and implement fair and just global and environmental norms and practices. For atoll nations, the ravages of sea level rise are now unalterable, and emission restrictions will no longer help us. For Tuvalu, we urgently require the means to build raised reclamation land to save ourselves. We must take bold alternative actions today to secure tomorrow. Mr. President, even if all greenhouse gas emissions cease tomorrow, Tuvalu and other low-lying atoll nations are sinking. Right now, 40% of the central district of Tuvalu's capital, Funafuti, is already below sea level at highest tide measures. We acknowledge plans by countries, but for Tuvalu, our existence has already been threatened, and it is already too late for Tuvalu and SIDS. We cannot wait for 10 years or for another year. Enough has been said. We must take action now to save and secure our future. Before I leave COP26, I was honored to be given this scarf. Just yesterday, a gift from the Aboriginal women of Australia. It displays the color of global warming with the strong message to stay safe in the blue areas. and I wear it today for them and our people in Tuvalu. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Philip Davis, Prime Minister of Bahamas. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Excellencies, this past summer at the Olympic Games, a young Bahamian woman and a young Bahamian man outran the competition to become gold medal winners in their 400-meter races. Our runners had the discipline and drive to work towards long-term goals. Our runners had the courage and determination to overcome every obstacle. And our runners had the ambition to believe, yes, they would succeed despite the odds. Colleagues, we must do the same to ensure that this gathering succeeds in a way that the prior 25 such meetings did not. We in the Bahamas will do what we can, but the limits of our nation's effort can accomplish are stark. We cannot outrun your carbon emissions. We cannot outrun the hurricanes, which are growing more powerful. And we cannot outrun rising sea levels as our islands disappear beneath the seas. Hurricane Dorian, that monster Category 5 hurricane, which devastated 2 of our main islands, feels like it descended upon us just yesterday. We still don't know exactly how many died, and some people still tremble at the first drop of rain. But every day, our yesterday is already becoming your todays, and fast becoming all of our tomorrows. But today we can still do something. As I said to the General Assembly of the United Nations in September, you will only be safe when we are all safe. We are out of time, colleagues. A recent study declared that the Bahamas had the cleanest air in the world. Other studies have shown that our distinctive, beautiful aquamarine seas are a magnificent carbon sink. Our seas reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. The Bahamas is not now and never has been the problem, but yet we are forced to pay the price. We are among the top 10 most vulnerable islands, nation-states in the world. And the question I have for my colleagues today is, are we brave enough for this moment? Are we braver than our predecessors who led our nations at the previous 25 climate change meetings? Can we summon the courage and ingenuity and determination to succeed where they did not? Promises and agreements are easy. Action, specific concrete policy changes, is a lot harder. Action requires courage. Every leader before us has postponed until tomorrow what needed to happen yesterday. And now tomorrow is here today, and countries like mine are out of time. Your support by financing and technology transfer are needed urgently so we can rebuild for resilience. Without change, if we are lucky, we will become refugees. Without change, if we are unlucky, then we will be left to the mercy of future Hurricane Dorians. More of my people will die. More will be left traumatized and homeless. People will be forced to flee, but flee to where? These are my neighbors, my family, and friends. My plea is both urgent and deeply personal, and I make it on behalf of all humanity. My friends, look outside. Our hurricanes are your fires and floods. Our hurricanes are your landslides and drought. Morally and ethically, it has to be beyond imagination and conscience that we do so little until it becomes too late. Please, do what is needed, not what you can get away with. Turn promises and agreements into action. Don't hide behind buzzwords and hazy assurances. Don't let the failures of the past limit our ambition for the present. Have the courage to acknowledge that failure today
will lead directly to destruction for humanity tomorrow. Like Bahamian gold medal winners, today we still have the chance to win the race against time and outrun the impact of climate change. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Carlos Agostinho do Rosario, Prime Minister of Mozambique. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Senhor Presidente da COP26, Excelências, é com elevada honra que, em nome de Sua Excelência Filipe Jacinto Nyusi, Presidente de Moçambique, nos dirigimos à comunidade internacional.
We speak to the international community in this COP26 debate. We recall the commitments of Mozambique. We committed ourselves to adopt concrete, effective and realistic measures, thanks to which we'll be able to tackle climate change challenges holistically. Mozambique is on the path of increasingly frequent weather events, droughts, floods. In 2019 and 2020, we were buffeted by 5 or 6 cyclones. They were devastating in nature. Ladies and gentlemen, we act on mitigation, adaptation, and the building of solid and resilient infrastructure pursuant to what is embodied in our updated NDC. Like other countries, developing countries that is, we do not have the necessary measures to finance our structural needs to face climate change. That's why we appeal to those who have more resources to allow us to have access to these resources through inter alia transfer of technology. The priority of Mozambique is the implementation of a transition program, energy transition program, so that we can have cleaner technologies that respect the environment more. This being said, we are in favor of an energy transition so that we actually can create industries that are more environment friendly and will mitigate the impact of climate change on us. Natural gas, for example, is a good means or a good transition energy we could opt for. We are ready to do what needs to be done to significantly reduce our carbon impact. 2% is what we have in mind. To achieve this, we will have to pick up the huge challenge of raising sufficient funds and technologies so that we can implement everything we want to do. That is why we call upon the international community to help us to provide the resources and the technologies we need so that the energy transition program can become for us a reality, and so that in the process we don't jeopardize the economic and social development of our country. We have placed a wager on the carbon markets. We've invested therein to encourage or to foster the sustainable development of our forests, which are a great carbon sinks, as you know. We would like to opt for, we'd like to, until 2024, we are part of the Security Council, we'd like to place this on the agenda. And we are in favor of Egypt hosting the COP 27 in 2022. We commit ourselves to support the climate system of our planet. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Stefan Lanev, Prime Minister of Bulgaria. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to address the COP26, and allow me to use that opportunity to express my gratitude to the Her Majesty government for organizing this event in extremely difficult times of global pandemic. Needless to say that the last IPCC report contains scientific evidence that the more frequent extreme weather events we are witnessing across the planet are a clear sign that the planetary warming is accelerating. It is already affecting our many aspects of lives, economies, and ecosystems. Our presence here today means that we realize how important it is to work together and that more credible actions are needed by all countries and by every one of us to limit the temperature rising. In this context, Bulgaria is completely determined to fulfill its commitment to the Paris Agreement. Along with the other European Union member states, Bulgaria will work for reaching the goal of climate neutrality by 2050 and for the more ambitious goal of 55% of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, which is enshrined in EU legislation. At a national level, we have developed an entirely new set of measures in our Recovery and Resilience Plan. It will become a new roadmap for decarbonization of the Bulgarian industry and for reaching economical growth within a sustainable and preserved environment, which includes phasing out of coal use by 2038-2040. Our efforts are focused on the three main goals: accelerated further development of renewable energy sources and hydrogen, increase of the energy efficiency of the economy, and sustainable mobility. All the measures that will lead to the green transition are carried out in the economic reality of today, the reality of an unprecedented pandemic and rising energy prices. Our main concern is the risk of job losses and the energy security of our country, as we believe that only a performing and a vital economy can be transformed. Therefore, the national features should be taken into account for a fair and proportionate approach. Bulgaria supports the united efforts of governments, private sectors, academia, and other stakeholders in our common goal to fight climate change. No country alone is able to face the global threat to climate change because we don't have the option of or luxury of failure. Let us join our effort to reach a new consensus among all countries on the necessary climate actions and goals to achieve global climate neutrality by mid-century, as well as to agree on decisive short and medium-term policies based on the right balance between mitigation and adaptation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Robert Abella, Prime Minister of Malta. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished guests. Climate change is real, and it is happening now. And it is having devastating impacts. This means that we need to work quickly and effectively to mitigate these impacts. And as world leaders, we are here because we recognize that it's our responsibility to find and implement solutions, ones that give our children hope for a better future, and the serenity of mind that we are committed to walk the talk with real global collaboration. We must believe that together we can make the difference for our children, our families, our peoples, and above all, for humanity and our planet. This is why COP26 is a turning point for mankind. This is it. To start with, we need to make the Paris Agreement work, ensuring it remains our uniting force to combat this reality, to foster a spirit of cooperation and solidarity that recognizes that the whole is much stronger and more impactful than the individual parts. We must also all be committed to play our part. For climate change knows no borders. Its implications are universal, but its impacts are local, and its consequences have a disproportionate impact on the most vulnerable. Fundamental principles must therefore be adhered to in our fight against climate change. Our commitment to convene here in Glasgow must be translated into active and, I dare say, passionate commitment to undertake meaningful and impactful actions. And as the world slowly recovers from the pandemic, the lessons we learned must not be ignored. And the slogan, "Building Back Better," cannot just remain a rhetorical expression. We must effect real change and convincingly ensure a just transition that leaves no one behind in a compelling and tangible manner based on digitalization, talent, and a revision of how we measure national value and wealth. At the same time, we must reinforce our ambitions for collaboration and solidarity. The prosperity of one country should not translate into the isolation of another. The planet's new future should be based on the alignment of nations in their right for a better world, a world without disparity. If we aim for success in mitigating the ravages of climate change and building our resilience, we must also recognize the differentiated impact of climate change, especially upon the most vulnerable. The truth is that we all have a part to play in mitigating the climate impacts and addressing adaptational capacities. Malta will not be passive. Our commitment is to implement a low-carbon development strategy with ambitious 2030 targets that will lead us to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. For a small country of just over 300 square kilometers, with limited natural resources and very limited capacity for emissions reductions, these targets are very challenging. But Malta was the country that brought climate change to the attention of the United Nations General Assembly in 1988, and we want to live up to that legacy. Also, because we understand the threat that climate change poses to small island states that are increasingly being battered by climatic extremes, from rising sea levels to devastating storms, from drought to sudden precipitations, from import dependency to intermittent isolation caused by heavy storms. Small island states are currently in grave danger, and we all have a duty to ensure that no coastal state loses any of its rights due to climate change. This is why Malta is committed to offer its assistance to small island developing states. We share similar risks. We live common circumstances. And because sharing experiences and transferring knowledge are key components of climate action, we wish to share with small island developing states our experiences and our lessons learned for a fair and successful decarbonized economy. On a concluding note, transformation, infrastructure, and adaptation capabilities need financing. It must therefore be ensured that funds are channeled to where they are most needed. Recognizing that developing countries are facing major challenges, Malta is committing to immediately double its contribution to the Green Climate Fund as of now. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to make one final appeal. Let's rise to the occasion. Together, we will defeat this global existential threat to give our children what they truly deserve, a better future. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It's now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Edouard Negrente, Prime Minister of Rwanda. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it is my great pleasure to represent His Excellency Paul Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda, at COP26. I would like to express my appreciation to the United Kingdom for hosting this summit and to the government and people of Scotland for your warm hospitality. We are falling short of our duty to both people and the planet if we don't urgently address climate change. To cut temperatures to below 1.5 degrees, a 45% reduction of emission is required. This calls for immediate, rapid, and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Excellencies, in Rwanda, we have seen firsthand the impact of climate change. Floods, droughts, and landslides have damaged livelihoods and property and tragical costs to many lives. That is why Rwanda is committed to reducing emissions by 38% in the next decade and reach net zero by 2050. Rwanda looks forward to working with partner states and institutions to ensure our mitigation and adaptation plans can effectively be effectively implemented and make impactful contribution to global efforts. I take this opportunity to thank every country that has ratified the Kigali amendment to the Montreal Protocol and encourage all remaining parties to do so. If implemented fully, the amendment could avoid to 0.4 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of the century. It is also time for us to come together to realize the potential of the Paris Agreement. Let us keep the 1.5 alive, scale up timely and ambitious actions, mobilize finance, and complete the Paris rulebook so that there are no more delays to climate actions. Rwanda pledges its full support for inclusive and transparent negotiations and for collaboration and dialogue between partners around the world. I thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. José Ulises de Pina Correia y Silva, Prime Minister of Cabo Verde. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Obrigado, Sr. Presidente. Thank you, Mr. President.
José Ulises de Pina Correia y Silva, Prime Minister of Cabo Verde. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Obrigado, Sr. Presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. Cabo Verde is an African country and a small island developing state, and this is a double condition that means that we have a lot of economic and environmental vulnerability and that we're very much exposed to natural phenomena. We agree with the African group that it is necessary to defend ambitious cuts in greenhouse gas emissions in order to avoid an increase in global temperatures above 1.5 degrees centigrade by the end of the century. Our public policies, the transfer of technology, is necessary to bring about a just transition, and we must ensure that funding for climate actions are a reality and bring about the conditions required to ensure that we can access and make our objectives a reality. Mr. President, Cabo Verde has assumed commitments that we have carried out, and our NDCs have been updated, and we commit to reduce our emissions by 30% by 2030 and reach carbon neutrality by 2050. We are making an effort to ensure that by 2030 we have 50% renewable energy thanks to a higher level of energy efficiency, and we currently have 20%. By 2030, we will be replacing 20% of our fleet of internal combustion vehicles, replacing them with electric vehicles, reaching 30% of electric vehicles in our fleet by 2030. And in agriculture, we have invested a significant amount to use treated and desalinized desalinized water in our agricultural system, and we're a small island developing state that's contributing a lot to reducing carbon emissions, but is suffering a significant amount from the effects of climate change. In fact, all islands are significantly affected by climate change, and the solution requires collective actions and commitments, and the small group of countries, the G20, needs to do a lot more because they are the ones that can make a difference. The time has come.
Preciso erradicar a pobreza extrema que afeta milhões de pessoas no mundo, porque ela não facilita a massificação de práticas.
2 million people, whilst they haven't done anything to contribute to the degradation of the climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure now to welcome His Eminence, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Secretary of State of the Holy See. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor of reading an excerpt of the message of Pope Francis addressed to the President of this conference. We can achieve the goals set by the Paris Agreement only if we act in a coordinated and responsible way. Those goals are ambitious, and they can no longer be deferred. Today, it is up to you to take the necessary decisions. We are facing an epochal change that calls for commitment on the part of all, particularly those countries possessed of greater means. These countries need to take a leading role. For its part, the Holy See has adopted a strategy of net zero emissions operating on two levels. First, the commitment of Vatican City State to achieve this goal by 2050. And second, the commitment of the Holy See to promote education in integral ecology, to favor a cultural model of development and of sustainability centered on fraternity and on the covenant between human beings and the natural environment. Along these same lines, on 4 October last, I joined a number of religious leaders and scientists in signing a joint appeal in view of COP26. What clearly emerged was a remarkable convergence on the urgent need for a change of direction, a decisive resolve to pass from the throw-away culture prevalent in our society to a culture of care for our common home and its inhabitants now and in the future. Humanity possesses the wherewithal to effect this change. Special care must likewise be shown for the most vulnerable peoples, in whose regard there is a growing ecological debt related to commercial imbalances with environmental repercussions and to the disproportionate use of the natural resources of one's own and of other countries. The ecological debt raises in some ways the issue of foreign debt, the burden of which often hinders the development of peoples. We can and must restart from a consideration of all these aspects, along with the setting in place of carefully negotiated procedures for forgiving foreign debt, linked to a more sustainable and just economic restructuring aimed at meeting the climate emergency. Sadly, we must acknowledge how far we remain from achieving the goals set for tackling climate change. This cannot continue. There is no time to waste. All too many of our brothers and sisters are suffering from this climate crisis. Now it is time to act urgently, courageously, and responsibly. I accompany you with my prayers as you take this important decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Excellencies, friends, it is of course a pleasure to be Thank you, Your Eminence, for the message from the Holy Father. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, as I was saying, it's a pleasure to be with you today as we close now the World Leaders Summit. And over the past 2 days, leaders have been clear. This COP must deliver our shared goal of pursuing efforts to keep 1.5 degrees within reach, including through the negotiations. And we have made progress. The Paris Agreement is working. We are bending the emissions curve downwards. We are becoming more resilient to climate change. And we've heard some good announcements on mitigation, adaptation, and finance over the past 2 days. But positive though all is, we know that it is not enough. Over these 2 days, we've heard that clearly from very many leaders, a chasm still remains between the words and the actions. And we've heard clearly about the stark reality that many face. Yesterday, Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados told us, and I quote, 1.5 is what we need to survive. 2 degrees is a death sentence. And so we have less than a decade left to keep our shared goals, the goals of the Paris Agreement, within reach and limit the rise in global temperatures to well below 2 degrees, pursuing efforts to 1.5. And yesterday, His Excellency Carlos Alvarado Quesada of Costa Rica told us that he'd explained his departure to Glasgow to his very concerned 8-year-old. And he said to his son, I have to go because we need to fix this. And we all know that he's right. The events over the coming days will continue to drive action. But the fate of the Paris Agreement rests on whether or not we can agree how to accelerate progress to 2030. And so our negotiated outcome must launch a decade of ever-increasing ambition and action, or we will put our Paris goals in serious jeopardy. Over these 2 days, leaders have made clear why such an outcome is needed. And ministers expressed in principle support at the pre-COP in Milan and the London ministerial that I convened in July. And we've heard different proposals. But the time for proposals and agreement in principle has passed. Now is the time for decision, for consensus. So I ask all world leaders to make clear to your ministers and negotiators that you expect this COP to produce resolution. And please tell them to come with a currency of compromise to these negotiations. And tell them that in 2 weeks' time, when Glasgow is behind us, we will all want to be able to look our people in the eye and be able to say that we played our part in keeping 1.5 alive. And success depends on all of us, but particularly our leaders. A crisis of such gravity and urgency requires direction from the top. Let's be frank, the history books will not relay the names of the officials stuck in the negotiating rooms. They will tell of world leaders and the course that they set at this critical juncture. So it is up to you, to world leaders, to ensure that the power of your words on this stage translates into actions and decisions from your ministers and negotiators. The world is watching, and it's time to deliver. This brings us to the end of our national statements in this plenary for today. Distinguished heads of state and government, the opening of the second part of the high-level segment will be held on Tuesday, the 9th of November at 10 a.m. in this plenary. With that, I declare this joint meeting of the COP, CMP, and the CMA adjourned.